Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Ruzek and I'm the Vice President for Engagement for the Alumni Association, and I'm so glad that so many of you have taken time to be with us today. And we got a really great topic. Do you do what you do best every day? This seemingly simple question is the key to career well-being, one of the 5 elements of well-being. And this interactive webinar will not only bring out your best self, but find opportunities for recharging, rediscovering, and rethinking who you are and what you want from your work. And we got a really good presenter coming up, and you'll hear from him shortly. But first, a few housekeeping items. And actually, what we have up here is, with today's webinar, we have crossed the 10,000 mark of day of attendees to these webinars over the last 4.5 years. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to both any returning webinar participants or new people. You are part of this great turnout of alumni and students and friends of the university who have taken part in this webinar series. So I appreciate everyone's involvement. And the webinar series is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the Alumni Association, where we have conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. Initiatives like the series are made possible in part by our Alumni Association members. So if you're a member, thank you. And if you're not, hey, check us out, umnalumni.org/membership. Our members create powerful opportunities and ignite success for current students and nearly 500,000 alumni around the world. And just one last plug, our maroon shirt for 2018 is still on sale through October 31st, designed by our student designer, Brianne Christian. If you'd like to get yours, visit umnalumni.org/maroon shirt. And the Maroon Shirt supports free platforms like our Maroon and Gold Network, which is a free online resource for alumni and students, where you can find others who are willing to share career advice and do informational interviews. It's a really good resource to check out. You can visit that at umnalumni.org/maroon and gold. One more other formal webinar coming up December 6th, how to get hired at the U of M, with Patricia Isaac of the Office of Human Resources. And that's going to be a great conversation. And I think there will be one coming up on November 27th that we haven't got online yet, but stay tuned for that. Look for that in the Alumni Weekly email newsletter. Last but not least, thank you to our partner and webinar supporting sponsor, Liberty Mutual Insurance. Just a few technical items. You've joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel, and dial-in information will be displayed. And if you're experiencing audio difficulties, maybe shut down any unnecessary applications, move over to a hardwired connection on for your internet, maybe versus a wireless signal. We'll definitely have time for questions during the webinar. So as those come to mind, feel free to type them into the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll monitor it along the way. And we'll also have some time at the end of the webinar to go over that. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Chad Ellsworth. Chad is an author, professional keynote speaker, career leadership and life coach, and entrepreneur. He has worked at the University of Minnesota since 2004 and is currently a career coach in the Undergraduate Business Career Center at the Carlson School of Management, where he is recognized in 2018 as Staff of the Year by a vote of the school's students. He is passionate about helping others connect their interests, passions, skills, and strengths to their personal and professional goals so that they have the opportunity to do what they do best every day. And Chad recently authored a new book, Building Up Without Tearing Down: How to Cultivate Heroic Leadership in You and Your Organization. If this was the movie Step Brothers, I would feel like Will Ferrell, John C. Reilly. Chad's one of the best colleagues here at the U, so I'm really excited to welcome him to the webinar series. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you, John. Am I Will Ferrell or John C. Reilly?
We'll maybe flip a coin to see who's who.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm really excited to be coming to you live from the UMAA studios, or possibly later via YouTube if that's how you're watching this. But really excited to be here, really excited to talk with you all about this, because this is absolutely my passion kind of topic, and something I love talking about, and I will do my best to get you in and out of here in the amount of time that we have, because yeah, I will talk as much time as anyone gives me about all of this. So John told you a little bit about who I am, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about where we're going with this. So I want to give you a glimpse of who you are at your best. With the time that we have, I'm not going to do a deep dive with every single one of you, but want to give you just that little bit of glimpse there. You can give you an overview of the 5 areas of well-being. We're going to talk through and address the 3 F's, so our foes, our fears, and our failures. And ultimately, I want you to leave here today with a plan to become your best self. So I saw a lot of familiar names, and a lot of people reach out to me, telling me they're really excited to be joining us here today. So some of you know who I am, but not everybody does. So I want to tell you a little bit about who is this guy. As John mentioned, I'm an author, a coach, and a speaker for my company, which is Caped Coaching. I'm a career coach at the Carlson School of Management, a board certified coach, and Gallup certified strengths coach. I love coaching. I include Cubmaster in there because it is where I spend a great deal of time, and I'm happy to serve in that role for my 2 kiddos. And for those of you being, alums of the University of Minnesota, you may recognize me from the College of Biological Sciences, Fraternity and Sorority Life, student activities. I've also served as president of the board of directors for hazingprevention.org. And then you'll see this really nice photo on the right of my book, which I was super excited to publish this summer, which is called Building Up Without Tearing Down. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and where I bring to this. And I think, I certainly come from a lot of different places, and I really feel blessed to be able to take all of those and reflect on those and help a lot of people, no matter where you're at, in terms of becoming your best self. So I'll start with a little analogy, and my kiddos are very much into video games at this stage of their life. This is a screenshot from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I believe, and if I'm wrong about which chapter of the Zelda series this is, yeah, feel free to let me know about that. But a lot of times when you look at these video games, you have that little heart monitor in terms of your energy at the top of the screen, and I think that's a really great way of describing how we move through this world. There are some things that take energy from us. There are some things that allow us to recharge those hearts and to feel more energized in what we do. And the more that we understand where those things come from and how we can replenish those hearts and that energy, the more successful and more fulfilled and just more happy we can walk through this world. So I want to start with a super shocking statistic. 67% of the American workforce is disengaged at work. And so what that means is 2 out of every 3 people, and this is one of those cheesy moments where you could do a look to your left, look to your right. 2 of those people of the 3 are disengaged at work. And that's really, really kind of shocking and saddening that so many of us walk through our everyday lives not even being engaged where we spend the majority of our time at work. And this is a big part of why I do what I do. I feel it's really important for all of us to bring our best selves to our work and to really enjoy that time that we have and to, feel fulfillment through that, because that is where we spend the majority of our lives. The reason that is so incredibly relevant is because when you look at Gallup and Healthways, and for those of you that know Gallup from the polling, the majority of the work that they do is actually in the area of human development, team development, really just how do people, live their best lives and work collaboratively in organizations. And when they have done their research in terms of well-being, and they define that through the 5 dimensions that you see there on the left. So the first dimension being our purpose well-being, which is love for what we do each day. The second is the quality of our relationships, which is social well-being. The third is the security of our finances, or financial well-being. The fourth is vibrancy of our physical health, or physical well-being. And the 5th and final one is pride we take in what we have contributed to our communities, and that's community well-being. When they study these and they conduct these major, research studies every year, they publish results, and really consistently over time, and this, has certainly not changed dramatically in the entire time that they've been measuring this, but half of the US population is thriving in 1 or 0 of those 5 elements. So when they survey people and they look at the measures that make up those different areas of well-being, half of us are thriving in one or none, and a quarter of us are not thriving in any of those areas. And I think that can't help but spill out into everything that we see in the world around us in terms of, I don't know if you feel this way when you look, across our communities or social media or TV or the radio, but it feels like we're more disconnected and divided and isolated than ever before. And I think a lot of it comes with how we're taking care of ourselves first and foremost. And that's such an important part of, when we think about our own well-being, the stuff that we're putting into us ultimately causes what comes out of us. And I think, we have to start with a strong foundation. Looking at those stats, only 7% are thriving across all 5, and that's such a small part of our community. And so I start with that, and I think, that's certainly a great way of understanding, if you maybe don't feel the best, if you don't feel like you're being your best, doing a little quick snapshot of where you might be struggling in each of those 5 areas can give you some really good insight. These are certainly not just 5 silos, but 5 truly interrelated components that will help you understand kind of what's causing you to feel a certain way. So I want to ask you right now, if you're willing, and this is a challenge by choice, but right there in the chat box, if you want to mention maybe one of the areas that you're doing well and then one that you're struggling in. And you don't need to provide a lot of description in those, but one area that you are particularly proud of where you're at this point, and one that is maybe not even struggling, but one that you certainly want to focus on in terms of improving. Love seeing the comments come in. Thank you. So for the focus of our talk today, I really just want to kind of hone in on that purpose well-being. And sometimes it's referred to as career well-being. But as Gallup has thought more and more about this term, purpose is certainly more inclusive because we don't all, do what we do best in a paid professional sense. Some of us, it's the areas that spill out, from other areas of our lives, or, if we're maybe at the point of our life where we're retired, we might serve in other ways through, volunteer work. So there's a lot of different ways this shows up. So career well-being, purpose well-being, they're fairly interchangeable. And the way that I like to understand this is that if you approach your day, much similar to what you see on the screen with the clock, that from the moment you get in until, lunchtime, you're just looking forward to lunch. And from lunch until the end of, the kind of the traditional workday, you're just looking forward to getting out of there. You're probably not doing really well in that sense. In fact, there's a lot of data that, Gallup has tracked, and they've asked people to wear stress monitors and to swab their cheeks with Q-tips to measure stress chemicals in their bodies. And they've actually got a lot of really good, robust information in terms of what the physiological experiences of people at the workday who maybe aren't engaged at work, or who are maybe, not doing what they do best every day, compared to those who are doing what they do best every day and are feeling really engaged and fulfilled by their work. And the interesting thing is that for people who are not doing what they do best every day, they're experiencing the workday as 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week of that true fight or flight response. Our bodies don't really have a different level of stress for work stress as compared to, death-defying stress, such as a giant shark threatening to eat you as a little fish. This is from Finding Nemo. But our bodies don't really distinguish types of stress. They just give us stress. There's one major type of stress that they will give us. And when you think about, if you're spending 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, or whatever those numbers are for you, under this type of circumstance, it's going to have a dramatic impact on every area of your well-being, but certainly your physical well-being. And that's exactly what Gallup's research has shown, is that when they track these stress chemicals and they tracked blood pressure and heart rates and looked at how people were experiencing their work days, those who were engaged at work and had higher, kind of satisfaction throughout the day and were, kind of engaged and enjoying what they did each day, were dramatically lower in terms of the health effects that they were seeing as a result of their workday. So the people who were disengaged, who were not enjoying what they were doing at work, they were much more likely to develop heart disease, have kind of exacerbated mental health issues, and even there was a 24% higher likelihood of heart attack associated with that as well. So just going through our workday not doing what we do best has a dramatic impact on our daily lives. And that's a big part of why this is so important to me, because yeah, it's great to make a lot of money, be really successful, but at the end of the day, if we're not enjoying what we do each and every day, it does have a very real impact on us on ways that aren't always easy for us to measure, other than the research that has been done before. So I want to move slightly away from Gallup and ground this a little bit. So I work in the Carlson School right now, and whenever you can pull on something from the Harvard Business Review, it's a great win. But Peter Drucker wrote this really wonderful article as part of Harvard Business Review's 10 essential must-reads, which anytime that you can get into that list, it's something pretty important. But I really want to just kind of pull out that third paragraph. So talks about needing to cultivate a deep understanding of yourself. What are your most valuable strengths and most dangerous weaknesses? Equally important, how do you learn and work with others? What are your most deeply held values? What type of work environment can you make the greatest contribution? So he's really talking about, in terms of being successful and being engaged and productive in work, it all comes back to those very simple questions about what do you do best and how do you do what you do best every single day. And Peter Drucker, who has no affiliation with Gallup or the Clifton Strengths, StrengthsFinder, StrengthsQuest kind of assessment, if you've ever heard of those, but says it takes far more energy and work to improve from incompetence to mediocrity than it takes to improve from first-rate performance to excellence. So the idea being those areas where you are naturally inclined to be good, those things that you enjoy, those things that you really find yourself gravitating towards, those are your greatest opportunities for excellence. They come more naturally, they come, you learn them more easily, you're able to, succeed faster with those. And so those are all really wonderful areas to start. Now to pull back a little bit into a slightly different realm, but Parker Palmer wrote a really wonderful book titled Let Your Life Speak. And in that book is where this kind of wonderful quote comes from. But our deepest calling is to grow into our own authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. As we do so, we will not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service in the world. And so hopefully between Gallup, between Peter Drucker, and now Parker Palmer, giving you all sorts of this, kind of underlying evidence of how we find those things that we do best. And with that, I want to ask you to just take a quick minute here to think about, what is the best thing about you? What do you enjoy doing the most? And what was your most fulfilling experience? And I'm going to just hit a little bit of a pause here and give you a couple of quick seconds to think about that. Okay, as you give that a little bit of thought, I now want to ask you in one phrase or sentence, and again, drop this right into the chat box, challenge by choice, as comfortable as you are, feel free. If you were to think about, in terms of those things that you do best, really fulfilling experiences, how would you describe in one phrase or sentence who you are at your best? So again, as you feel comfortable, absolutely feel free to drop that in the chat box. I'm really loving the diversity of things that are coming in. I'm seeing a lot of really great, in terms of how we show up for others, connecting other folks. Yeah, so much good stuff. Thank you. I love this. So the challenge becomes, after we kind of discover who we are at our best selves, once we've identified who that is, and knowing that the critical ingredient of that purpose well-being is just answering yes to, do you do what you do best every day? There's very much a journey with this. And with that journey, I want to throw out that there are 3 major commitments. The first is a commitment to development. And so realizing that we don't have to have everything now. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be fully formed, perfectly arrived people. There's a lot of grace in that. This is very much a process. We can we continue to learn and develop and grow throughout our lives. So the first is that commitment to developing, realizing that we've all got a long way to go. The second is a commitment to patience. So again, understanding that this is not going to happen quickly, easily, expediently, that it's going to take some time and it's going to take some work. So the more that we really accept that this will take some time, the better off we'll be in kind of accepting that this is a process. It's not a quick destination. And the third commitment that I will ask all of you to have is a commitment to forward steps. So no matter how stuck you might feel, no matter where you're at, no matter how insurmountable the odds may be, there's always an ability to take the smallest of steps forward. And so realize that there's always a place that you can take at least one little tiny step forward. So the three commitments: to development, to patience, and to forward steps. And Lloyd Alexander has this wonderful quote, which I think will sum up this process for you, that life's a forge, yes, and hammer and anvil too. You'll be roasted, smelted, pounded. Stand boldly. Metal's worthless till it's shaped and tempered. It's more labor than luck. There's so much greatness in this quote, and it's part of the reason I wanted to share it with you, because I want to acknowledge first and foremost, and there is just so much struggle in this, and this is not always an easy process. And there are times when all of us, as we kind of go through this and struggle to do our best and to be our best and to show up as our best, that it just feels like there's nowhere to go. And so I want to acknowledge that this is not easy. This is honestly probably one of the hardest things you'll ever do. I know in my own life and with the people who are closest to me, seeing people absolutely on their knees in tears, I mean, this can be gut-wrenching. But there's a reason that we do it. And those of us that have been through those moments at different times in our lives know that the other side is worth it. So I want to acknowledge how hard this process can be, and I know sometimes I can come off as, hopelessly naive and optimistic because I always kind of look for the best in things, but I want to acknowledge just how hard this is, because it is hard. And I like to think of that, kind of process, that smelting and that, hammer and anvil process as a test. And I'm assuming we have mostly alumni, but everybody on this webinar, I'm assumed, has taken some sort of class at some point, and maybe passed or failed. And if you've failed, you kind of know what that feeling feels like. So when I talk about passing a test here, I don't want you to think of it's that single moment in time you either pass or you fail. But instead, this comes from kind of the original meaning of test, and it goes back to that forging process. So the original meaning, and the word that kind of gave us the word test, refers to a turtle shell, where our ancient ancestors used to melt down metals to make them pure and to make them stronger metals. And so this is very much a process that it's not a snapshot in time. You either make it or you don't, but it's a process of forging. And once you are sufficiently forged and have that strength, you are ultimately able to succeed. And so these tests are not there to break you, but to make you. And all those difficult things that we go through make us stronger, better people. When the thing that we're trying to achieve is worthwhile, and remember that those metals in the previous slide are worthless until they're forged, that is ultimately the process that we're going for. And Marcus Aurelius, famous Roman emperor, said that the impediment, sorry, lost my my screen there for a second. The impediment of action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And this was first kind of brought to me with an author, Ryan Holiday, I believe, but wrote The Obstacle is the Way. But it talks about how every obstacle we face in some way also gives us the opportunity to overcome that obstacle. And so if you think of, pop culture, and you have the giant, kind of enemy that stands in the way of the hero, there's always kind of that fatal weakness in that giant obstacle. Even in real life, if you think about, this giant company that is kind of blocking the way for the small, nimble startup, there are opportunities that come with being smaller and more nimble as a startup as opposed to the larger company. So no matter what the position is, there's always an advantage to your position versus the opposition. So what stands in the way becomes the way. The obstacle is the way. And I think that is a great way to think about these tests that we have in front of us. They're not insurmountable. There always is a path around. And to start with the first of the F's, speaking of our foes, really anything that is outside of you that gets in your way could be considered a foe. So as you see here, the road's closed, the bridge is out, there's no way around. And it's easy to kind of focus on, well, the bridge is out, we can't get to the other side. But again, there is always another way to that other destination. And the more you're able to think creatively and think in terms of what the opportunities are instead of what the obstacle is, the more that you can really start to see. And sometimes those obstacles are actually people. And I think those actually present one of the best opportunities and certainly a huge call for action for us in our world today. So as we think about overcoming these insurmountable differences in our communities and our organizations and our world, I want to encourage all of us to really focus on building bridges. And you'll see here on the screen the Bridge of San Angelo in Rome. I had the opportunity to visit there with a course with a Learning Abroad program through the Carlson Global Institute about a year and a half ago. And I got to stand on this bridge and to see the enduring strength of these bridges that the Romans built was absolutely incredible. But there's a real reason that those stand today, and I think there is absolutely a lesson that we can learn from, looking at their architectural skills. So I've got them listed here as the ABCs. And the first step is to assemble together, and we do that through the idea of community. So if you can imagine two pillars standing on opposite sides of the riverbank, they're totally separate in and of themselves. They have a strength to them, but they will never be greater than they currently are. They are simply those two pillars. As long as they stand apart, there's no more strength that can be added to those. They are grounded in and of themselves. And I think on the same line, as we think about our own lives, if we think about ourselves as pillars, we are grounded in ourselves in terms of we know what we do best, we know what we value, we know what we stand for. Those are all necessary ingredients. You can't start to think larger than that until that grounding is there. If you try to plant one of those pillars in some soft mush on the bank, it's not going to do so well. And so I realize too, in terms of our experiences, our identities, our backgrounds, some of us have more of that than others. But those of us that have the ability to really ground ourselves deeply and then still reach out across that riverbank have the responsibility to do that. So those of us that have identities and backgrounds and experiences that may make that safer absolutely have a responsibility to reach out across the bank. So the first idea when we think about community is that idea that there is more than just me into and of myself. When I see that there is greater potential by reaching out across that river to the other side, that there is greater strength there. That is the foundation of this idea, that we have to believe that we are stronger together than we are apart. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Talked about us all being wrapped in a single garment of destiny. He said, I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And I think that so beautifully illustrates this idea that we are all in this together. And so we have to believe that that is absolutely the first step, that there's greater strength together than there is apart. The second piece is building the scaffolding. So when the ancient Romans were to build one of these wonderful, arch bridges, they would start by constructing a temporary wooden scaffolding. And that scaffolding would really serve as the support to allow the larger structure to be built. And for us, that is our idea of communication. And I would really say even courageous and vulnerable communication. So the word courage gets co-opted a little bit into more akin to terms like bravery or valor, and you think of military terms. But really, the origin of the word courage means to speak your heart. The root of the word courage actually comes from the Latin root for heart. And it's very much about making yourself vulnerable. And when you think about how we're going to create a scaffolding that would allow this bridge to be built across difference, we have to be able to connect heart to heart. And it's easy to get wrapped up in, policies and strategies and, all these different ideas. But at the core of all of that is a simple human idea. And in a lot of times, in a lot of ways, that little part of our brain, that kind of earliest piece of our brain that kind of was the first to form, that fight or flight area, controls so much of our human behavior. Yeah, we take the more advanced parts of our brains and we build these ideas and policies and strategies around that. But at the core of all of it is an idea. And if we can speak idea to idea, heart to heart, we can start to bridge these larger differences. Because I don't think, at that basic level, so much of what we do comes out of fear rather than compassion, which leads me to the third. So when we look at these great structures, and I apologize to anybody listening along here who is a physics person. I am not. I have not taken physics in 25 years. But from what I understand, the giant keystone in the center of that arch, with its massive weight, pushes down on the rest of the blocks to really kind of lock those blocks into place. And so it allows for the strength of the structure, because as that weight pulls down, it compresses and strengthens the rest of the structure. And so the keystone is absolutely necessary to the enduring nature of those arches that the Romans built. And for us, that's compassion. So each and every one of us is a human being, surprise. But no, we are all fallible, mistake prone, sometimes hurtful people. I'm gonna not try to quote Star Wars, but I really, fear leads to hate, hate leads to, totally botch that quote for any Star Wars fans, but you know what I'm saying. It's Yoda. In any case, that basic emotion of fear leads to so much of a cascade of negative things in our world. And the more that we can meet each other with compassion, and that does not mean we don't hold people accountable, but if we can hold people accountable with compassion and really engage them and learn with them, that's how we keep these structures in place and bridge, these great differences. Being able to reach out and know that people are going to make mistakes. How do we, meet them in that place where they make the mistake and then help them learn and grow from it? And I think back to, I've made a lot of mistakes in my own life, and the ways that I've changed the most are when people met with me, one-to-one, and met me with compassion. And it wasn't about, kind of making me feel bad, but it really helping me learn and coming from that place of compassion. So that's what keeps, us kind of connected with people that are seemingly different from us. So that was the first of the three F's in terms of how we can deal with our foes. The second two are both internal, and they are our fears and our failures. And these are, things that are within us. And so even though we have that one kind of external foe that sometimes pushes against us, we also have these internal forces that can work against us as well. So the way that we think of fears is in terms of that biological, physiological reaction. And the first is that flight response. So forget everything and run. It's really easy, when something seems insurmountable, when we're frustrated, when we're scared, to just forget this. I'm getting out of here. This is too much. I can't handle this. I don't want to hold on anymore. I need an escape plan. And that is the flight response engaging. The second response that can come in is the face everything and rise. And so this is the, no matter what, I'm going to, fight like heck through this, and I'm just going to keep plowing ahead, and it's that kind of, no matter what, I'm just going to keep fighting, fight. And even as strong and bold as this reaction may seem, it's still grounded in fear. It's still that basic physiological response to self-preservation. I myself, or maybe my tribe, my people, are being threatened, and so I need to fight. And it's still ultimately grounded in fear and threat. And it's not as powerful of a response as we have capable with us. That most powerful response we have is actually, this comes from Dr. Kelly McGonigal, who, if I remember correctly, is at Stanford University. She studies the biology of stress. And she's found that when we focus on empathy, when we turn our attention to others, we ultimately give ourselves the best chance to survive and to thrive. So remember that our fears are largely grounded in ourselves, and kind of our people, but the more that we can turn our attention to others and something outside of ourselves, the more strength we actually get. Because what happens is from a chemical lens, you have the stress chemicals, they almost get the volume turned down when we focus on empathy. And Dr. McGonigal, what she's found is that our body throws, sorry for any chemists, biochemists that might be listening along, but oxytocin, serotonin, these different chemicals that really allow us to have a different experience with that kind of threat. And so what they do is they almost turn down the volume of the fear, and they give us, so the empathy with the emotion, the chemical actually allows us to connect more deeply with others. The adventure actually prepares ourselves for, thinking creatively about problems and, really engaging that side of the brain in terms of this is going to be fun. And there's a lot of different ways that this might be able to play out. And then the reason really sharpens our critical thinking. And so the three kind of pronged chemicals that enter our body when we start to focus on others rather than ourselves is really incredible. So the best way of kind of addressing your fear is by turning your attention not from yourself, but turning it towards others. The next fear that many of us have, and the way that this probably plays out the most for us, is this idea of what will others think of me? As we think about doing things that are big and bold and a little bit scary, this is probably the greatest fear that holds us back. When you think about going back to the very beginning, I asked you to think about what are those things that you do best and what are some of the experiences where these showed up. When you think about how might I let those play out now, in terms of whether it's your professional life or your personal life, if you start giving yourself to new areas and doing new things, what are other people going to think of you? And Joseph Campbell, who is one of the world's foremost mythology experts, he said, "What will they think of me must be put aside for bliss." And so the idea of, if we're looking for fulfillment, if we're looking for that best version of ourselves, we have to be willing to set aside what others think of us. Going back to those dimensions of well-being, there is no dimension that says, as long as others think highly of me, I'll be doing okay. They're largely based on things that you do with your own life, regardless of what others might think of you. And so if you truly want that well-being, yes, it's important to have relationships with others. It's important to contribute to your community. But those are the number one determinant. Always comes back to, do you have a chance to do what you do best? Are you able to be your best self? And the more that you can pursue that, the more you will find that satisfaction, that fulfillment, that meaning that you're craving. The last of the three F's are our failures. And these show up as our faults, our falling short, and our foundations. And the first one are times when we absolutely fall on our face and do something wrong. And I know I have done this countless times throughout my life. I could give you any number of examples of times where I've done that. Falling short is when we do everything we can, but the ultimate goal isn't there. So fault, it's doing something that is maybe not the right thing to do, and we make a mistake. Falling short is giving all of our effort, but it's not being enough, if that helps distinguish the two. I want you to start thinking about these as foundations. We oftentimes tell ourselves, because of our faults and our falling short, we can't possibly reach to that higher level. We've already proven that we don't deserve it, we're not worthy of it, that somehow it's unattainable for us. But there's a classic saying that every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. No matter who you are or where you are, we always have more chances. And there's countless examples of people throughout the world who have fallen on their face in the worst possible ways and made such horrible mistakes, but have still made amazing and wonderful and positive contributions to our world. You think about, what are some of those setbacks? They are merely foundations. They are things going back to the commitment, that commitment to development. So realizing, yeah, I made a mistake, but I'm still learning. I can still get there. It just means the timeline's a little longer than I thought the first time. So that ultimately, think of it as that foundation, that growing, that moving forward. Failures are really setting the stage for hope.
And one of the things I firmly believe with all my heart is that hope is the result of action, not the cause, and that we do not act because we have hope because we act. On the screen, you'll see a good chunk of the cast from one of my guilty pleasures, which is The Curse of Oak Island. If you know nothing about the show, there is allegedly an island in the North Atlantic off Nova Scotia that has a treasure buried deep, 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 deep on the island. And for at least 200 years, nobody has been able to reach it. There's multiple booby traps involved. There may be multiple treasure locations on the island. And this family, you can see in the kind of maroon shirt and the sort of blue-green shirts towards the left, just off of the center there, those are the Lagina brothers. And they are a couple of brothers from Michigan that have invested immense fortune into this dig. And I think they're 7 seasons in now. And every season they pull out just the smallest trinkets that kind of keep them going. And I've always wondered, how do they keep going at this? I mean, Marty is tied to the oil industry and has a pretty decent sized fortune, but he's sunk millions of dollars into this. And I start to wonder, at what point does he say enough? But it'd be easy for him and his brothers and the rest of, kind of the crew that's working there to sit in their room during the debrief sessions at the end of the episode and really wallow on, I don't know how we can have any hope. But it's the process of always going forward that gives hope. Too many times we sit back and we wait. As soon as I have hope, I will then proceed. But hope is the result of the action, not the cause. And we get hope by continually moving ourselves forward. So going back to those idea of the 3 commitments, the commitment to the forward step, no matter where you are or what you're struggling with or what that obstacle is, there's always the smallest step you can take forward. And that importance of not stopping, no matter what it is, take one small step forward. I know last night when I was working with my son with his homework, he was really struggling to write some sentences, and just asking him, pick one word, write one sentence, and just kind of keep plugging at it. That's the only way through. One of the sayings that comes out of my mouth a lot is the only way out is through. So keep plugging forward. Sometimes we find ourselves in a place where it's really hard to find that hope, and we don't want to keep moving forward. And there's no better person, I think, in the history of our world at instilling hope than Mr. Rogers. So I'd like to borrow a little quote from him. He said, "We'd all like to feel self-reliant and capable of coping with whatever adversity comes our way, but that's not how most human beings are made. It's my belief that the capacity to accept help is inseparable from the capacity to give help when our turn comes to be strong." And there's so much wisdom buried in this. One is the idea that, we've kind of romanticized this idea of the self-made person, and that we need to do it all ourselves, and to, the only way to get there is on our own, kind of the lone cowboy, really going off and doing it all. But if you look at the greatest success stories in our world, that's never true. Every single person has a team of people around them and people that they count on, they rely on. Our movies and our stories and our books, our tales that we tell others, we don't always include those teams, and I think that's a great disservice, because everybody has them. Every great person that's accomplished anything has had amazing people around them. The second part that is really buried in here that I think is just a wonderful treasure is that idea that my belief in the capacity to accept help is inseparable from the capacity to give help. And I think it's so much easier for us to help someone else that we forget that when it's our turn to ask for help, all those same people are willing to be there. And I know not too long ago here in my own life, I have asked for a lot of help, especially as I've gone through the process of writing the book and navigating some other things. I've asked for a lot of help, and I've been floored at how readily people are there to help me. But then, when I was presenting in Michigan earlier this week, as I was talking to one of the participants, he shared with me in the parking lot outside that he forgot how willing to help people are. And he, so he's a news reporter, and he was doing a story, and he was trying to get all these different people to interview and to learn from them. And he was shocked at how readily we, were willing to help him in that and refer him to other people. And I know when I got done talking with him, he said, yeah, there's this one person, Suzanne, that I really want to make sure I talk to. So I got up and I'm like, I know Suzanne, let me go grab her for you. And then Suzanne sat down with him and talked with him for a while. And so this process just kind of kept going, and he was able to talk to, I think, every single person that was there and that spoke in terms of doing his story. And just asking for that help, is such a large hurdle for so many of us. And yet we so readily help others over that hurdle. And so I ask you to really keep that in mind, how easily you'll reach out to somebody else and help them over, because those hands will be there for you too. So that kind of brings me to the point where I wanted to summarize kind of what we've talked about here, but we talked a little bit about the 5 areas of well-being. I gave you the briefest introduction to 4 of those, but talked, most clearly about the first one. Talked about the 3 commitments, so realizing that this requires development, realizing that we're always learning, that humility that comes with that. Patience, cliche, Rome was not built in a day, but this takes time, and we have to kind of keep going at it. And in that vein, the forward steps, always driving things forward. Then the 3 F's, we talked through how to address foes, so whether it's realizing that the obstacle itself will present the solution, a lot of times that works well with strategy. When you're dealing with another person as a foe, really reaching out through compassion, through community, through communication, and building that bridge with them. How we address our own fears, really recognizing that our fears are biological responses and that we have the ability to overcome that just by taking that second to pause and think out larger than ourselves. Who else is involved? How can I use the energy to help and serve others? And our failures, with the hope of that action brings and that moving things forward. So again, that commitment to forward steps, as well as the idea that we can always ask for help, that there are always people there willing to help us. So that said, I'd love to answer any questions that y'all might have.
All right, we'll let Chad get a drink of water here, and if folks have questions, we have plenty of time for some Q&A here at the end. I think the one thing that you just touched on that definitely resonated with me, kind of in let's just use maybe not so much personal example, but let's say when people are in the career search mode or wanting to do a career transition, I think your point about asking for help is often the biggest hurdle people may have, or at least that I often experience as far as talking with alumni. So just maybe kind of in that, let's just call it career transition framework, what would you say are maybe just some best practices about how people can reach out to their networks or maybe start to build a network as far as some of those career questions?
Yeah. So a couple of things came to mind. The first is that, and I suppose I want to set a little bit of context here. Somebody very close to me in my own life is going through this transition right now. And one, that means I fully appreciate how hard this is and how gut-wrenching this process can be. But 2, this is something that absolutely I believe strongly in, and this shows up in my personal life as well. One of my coaches that I've had actually gave me the idea whenever there's one of those tasks, whether it's reaching out to X number of people or sending out X number of applications or whatever that might be, something that seems really kind of awful that you're really dreading doing. Mm-hmm. Put coins, M&Ms, some other little treat in a little jar, and your goal is to get all of those out of the jar. So if, say for example, your goal for that day is to reach out to 5 people, drop 5 M&Ms in that jar, or quarters or dollars, whatever you want to do, and pull one out for every reach out that you do, every time you reach out to somebody and ask for their help. Mm-hmm. The other thing that came to mind, and so certainly repeating that process. The other thing that came to my mind is, again, I brought up that somebody very close to me in my own life has been going through this, and I know how hard that process can be. And so I actually reached out on their behalf, and some of you might even be on this webinar, but again, floored at how quickly people responded and said, hey, I want to help. Mm-hmm. And all I did was say, I know this person, and here's kind of what they're looking for. Would you be willing to talk with them? And how many people just within 2 or 3 days even responded and said, yes, I'd love to talk with them. So one, I'm super thankful for my own network and just how helpful they are. But two, I firmly believe, that last, slide with Mr. Rogers, that, willingness to give and take help is so true.
Yeah, it's kind of like in that classic Beatles lyric, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. So it's kind of like, especially like you were saying, like people their instinct is to help others, but remember that, especially as you demonstrate that can come back your way too.
Yeah.
All right, got some great questions here. For those who might suffer from low self-esteem, distorted self-image, what might help in determining greatest strengths in an honest manner?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I'm going to give a couple different answers. I'm going to give my, so I fell in love early with Gallup and StrengthsFinder, and that's part of why I became a certified strengths coach. So it's a great tool for articulating those, finding a coach, whether it's me or anyone else that is trained with strengths, can help kind of identify those. It's a wonderful instrument. It's been used with 17 million people now worldwide. So that's one great option. And Gallup, actually, I feel like I'm doing an ad for Gallup. They don't pay me anything, by the way. I just really love their work. But they just revamped yesterday or day before the reports that are available when you take the assessment. The other is, and I think this is really soul-filling, and I say this as somebody who, honestly, I deal a lot with low self-esteem. There are some mental health things that are prevalent in my family too. So if you find the people that you're closest to, and maybe even starting with the people that you trust the most, and just saying, I'd really like to know, what is that really good stuff you see in me? And I know it can be a hard question to ask, and I think that's why I start with the people that are closest to you. But just asking someone else for, like, what are my best qualities? What do you see? And it can be soul, I can't speak, so soul-filling, there we go, to hear those back from people. And I know I've done this actually when I was going through my training with Gallup as a certified coach. We actually did this with each other, the other people in our room. And the only thing those other people had to go on is we'd tell a story about a meaningful time in our life, and other people would listen for these qualities in us. And so even total strangers would give us, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different characteristics that they saw in us. And it can be so good for your soul to, kind of hear that language, reflected back at you in terms of the good that others see in you. So that would be a really easy one that you could do.
And we still have some time for questions. I think you also have a slide about your book too, and things like that. We'll get that up on the screen.
So there's my last slide. If you're at all interested in the book, you can go to the website, which is just the title of the book, buildingupwithouttearingdown.com. So I would love to get that in as many folks' hands as possible.
Yeah. We have another question. What are some ways to translate your passions into job titles? I know what I'm great at, but struggle to figure out what I want to do.
Yeah, that is a great question too. And I think this is a struggle for a lot of people, honestly, whether it's you've taken, some sort of assessment, or you just have an idea in terms of what it is. And I think the first place I'd start is thinking about, I'm trying not to go back in the slides, but Peter Drucker's article in terms of, what are my values? And that word's a big buzzword, but it just means, when push comes to shove, where do you want things to fall? Like, what's important for you to have in your life? If that's, serving the greater good, if that's, having the opportunity to work at, a really prestigious company, if that's working somewhere where they really invest in your development, whatever those things are, understanding what those are, looking at then who your people are, who are the people that you are most drawn towards, really try to get crystal clear on that. And, if you're an artistic person, don't feel bad about drawing that. What do those people look like? What are they doing? What are they wearing? Where are they going? How do they spend their time? Really just trying to think about, visualizing who are those people. And I think once you find those things and you have your skill set already, as you mentioned, you kind of know your strengths, and then you know your people and you know what you value, you can start, reaching out to people that have 1 or 2 or 3 of those things, and doing those things that we call informational interviews, but networking, which I like to just say is making friends. I know the Minnesota Alumni Network is so incredibly generous. They have a great tool with the Maroon and Gold Network that you can tap into. Those are people that are signed up purely to help. So it's a wonderful opportunity to tap into that.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that you talk to people who meet one or two or three of those things, the more you'll start to find those opportunities show themselves. I think it's so hard to go into the, a job search process and, kind of not knowing what you don't know, trying to find a job that matches something you don't always know exactly what you're looking for. So the more you talk with others and narrow the field, kind of narrow that scope. If I'm trying to find a great restaurant to go to at some point in the future, and I'm looking across all the Yelp reviews in the United States, it's going to take me a really long time. But if I narrow the field that I'm going to be in, Lincoln, Nebraska, which is my hometown, right around Thanksgiving, then I can narrow that field and have a better idea if I'm going to pick where I want to go eat those few days that I'm back home. Same thing with a job search. The more you can narrow the field and kind of not be overwhelmed by the number of things out there, but there's so much out there that the more you can narrow that, the better off you'll be.
Mm-hmm. Another question, in your opinion, at what age should we start talking about the aspects of well-being? College, high school, middle school, maybe early career?
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Wow, I love that question. I think in an ideal world, that'd be a conversation we had from day one.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we can focus on what's right with people instead of what's wrong with people, the better this whole place is going to be. And I truly believe that with all my heart. I think so much of what happens and the hurt and the pain and the disconnection and the isolation that we see in our world is due to the ways that we hurt each other. And I think too often we're acting out of fear. Fear drives some really terrible behaviors. But when we can act out of a place of compassion and understanding and grace, the better off that, I think we'll all ultimately be.
Mm-hmm. One other question that came up is just, and this is a very broad question, but just kind of in the context of balancing a lot of these things with work-life balance, because I think that's often the pull that we have between both kind of the personal and professional lives. Just any other tips that you'd have for others as far as balancing that work-life balance, so you can, because I think oftentimes when we have employment situations where somebody is empowering you
Mm-hmm.
to have that balance, and in my opinion, I think that's when often people do their best work.
Yep.
And go to the mat, because they know they have
Yep.
that kind of safety net underneath them.
Yep.
But just other thoughts you might have on that.
I love that this is probably maybe our last question, because
Yeah.
this is a perfect one to
Mm-hmm.
kind of end on. But so much of that work-life balance, when we think of work-life versus home life tension, can spiral up, if that's a thing, or spiral down.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really wonderful research that's been coming out from organizational development as a field, that the places that invest the most and really encourage people to live their best lives outside of work have the best people at work.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, and this is really intuitive, it's like a dumb moment. Why do we need research to show this? But when we are happy and fulfilled at home, we come to work in a much better place. And then we show up really great at work. And when we leave work, we leave in a really good place. And we go home and we take that good energy back home. And it's just a cycle that keeps going. Whereas if you think about,
Mm-hmm.
something, terrible happens on the way to work, and, it causes you to shift your attitude. And this is regarding your mindset so important. But
Mm-hmm.
if you come into work in a bad place, then you go through the workday probably in a bad place. And then bad day at work, you come home and you don't want to spend time with the people close to you or quality time, and you just want to, chill out and veg, and then you kind of lose that momentum, and then it just feeds
Sure.
the next day. And so being able to get out of that rut, and that's, part of why, confronting these 3 F's, I think is something that I care so deeply about, is we have to be able to pull ourselves out sometimes. We can't always count on someone else pulling us out. And the more that we can kind of get out of that rut when something negative maybe happens, especially, if it's that sudden kind of negative thing, the more that we can change our mindset around it, the better off that we'll be long term. We pull ourselves out of that spiral.
Well, Chad, thank you so much again, folks. buildingupwithouttearingdown.com. That's where you can find details on Chad's book. I have purchased it. I'll admit I'm a horrible reader, so I'm like starting to just chip through it. But obviously, we've had conversations about your work. But I do want to express my thanks and gratitude for the time you've shared with our over 200 people on the webinar today. So definitely a lot of interest in this area, and just appreciate all the advice and thoughtfulness that you shared on this topic with us today.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
sir.
And thank you, everybody, for listening and hanging with me for an hour here.
All right. Well, we'll wrap her up now on the home stretch. So again, December 6th. Often it's a question we get from alumni and friends: how do I work at the University of Minnesota? Come work with Chad and I. And Patricia Isaac at the Office of Human Resources will be giving a good webinar on that. And again, thanks to our webinar supporting sponsor, Liberty Mutual Insurance. And in closing, thank you to all the Alumni Association members who make initiatives like this webinar series possible. And you can also help our global community of alumni and students ignite success by joining today, umnalumni.org/membership. Again, thank you so much for being here. What a wonderful turnout online of alumni, students, and friends. Hope you enjoyed the topic. For those who have asked, we will send the recording link via YouTube to all the registrants who've signed up, so you can look for that hopefully in the next 2 or 3 business days. But again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.